I just finished watching Warren Buffett's greatest interview, and I even turned that interview into a 200-page transcript so I can read it over and over again. Now, this interview is actually Warren Buffett's operating system that he used for 60 years, and he doesn't even talk about it. This is the first time that he revealed it. And he doesn't go over stock picks. It's not investing maxims. It is his human algorithm. And it's so simple, it's almost offensive. Now, I've read the entire script again and again and took many, many pages of notes. And I've edited it down to just stuff that's actionable for you and me building companies today. Because here's the thing, everybody thinks they know Warren Buffett. They think it's about the be greedy when others are fearful, or compound interest, or buying Coca Cola. That's not it. That's the output. What I found in this interview is the input. The stuff he actually did every single day that led Berkshire Hathaway becoming more valuable than every company in the S&P 500 except the Mag 7. And the answer is so unglamorous, so boring, that most people will ignore it, which is exactly why it works. So, in the interview, he conducted it for over 14 years. And what makes this different from the other Buffett interview is that have you ever read his Three Kids Are in It? That Susie, Howie, Peter, and they're talking about what it was like to grow up as Warren Buffett's children when he wasn't Warren Buffett yet, or when he was just a guy in Omaha driving a Volkswagen, delivering newspaper as a kid, losing $50 at a racetrack, and learning how to not be a jerk in business meetings. And the kids, they're about to inherit the responsibility of giving away $150 billion, and the reaction when Warren told them, "Nope, I don't want the job." And Warren's response is, "I don't blame you." That tells you everything you need to know about this family. They didn't grow up rich. They didn't grow up entitled. They grew up watching their parents behave a certain way, and they're replicating that behavior with their own foundations. So what I'm going to do is take you through Buffett's life chronologically, but I'm only going to tell you the stories that prove a principle you can use. Because the goal here is not to worship Warren Buffett. The goal is to extract the algorithm and then apply it to your own life. So, let's get started. Tom Murphy, one of the best business operators Buffett ever met, told him this at lunch when Buffett was 40 years old. "You can always tell somebody to go to hell tomorrow. That's it. That's the whole thing." Buffett says this changed his life. He asked Murphy, "Did you used to tell people to go to hell a lot before that?" And Murphy said, "Well, I certainly did it more before I heard that advice than afterwards." Think about how much trouble that he keeps out of because of that. You haven't lost the option, so don't feel like you only got 15 seconds to say it. This is discipline disguised as kindness. It's Steve Jobs learning to count to 10. It's Rockefeller staying silent in meetings. It's Napoleon never writing angry letters immediately. Warren says, "I watched it work with Tom Murphy. Every lesson I learned from him was a good lesson." And then he says, this is the key, "There's a few letters or things I haven't written because I remember that advice." Control the downside. Preserve optionality. Don't blow up relationships for short-term satisfaction. This is the emotional cost control that nobody talks about. And I'm going to come back to this idea multiple times because it's the skeleton key to understanding how Buffett operated for 6 decades. This is not soft advice. This is not be nice. This is strategic patience. This is understanding that your reputation compounds over decades, and one angry email can destroy years of relationship capital. Now, let me take you through his life chronologically, but I'm only going to tell you stories that prove principles you can use. And the first principle is test everything with real money. Now, Buffett's first job, handicapping horses. He's 11 years old in Washington, D.C., and his dad just got elected to Congress. First thing Warren does, he goes to his dad and says, I want to take out every book they have on horse handicapping from the Library of Congress. His dad says, don't you think it's a little peculiar for a freshman congressman to make that first request? Well, Warren said, Pop, you'll be running for re-election in 2 years. I will look good for you if I'm a kid. So he gets hundreds of books on horse handicapping. And this is important. He's not just reading them, he's testing them. He's doing 40 races a day, 8 races at 5 tracks. On month-old racing forms, he buys for practically nothing from a place off North Clark Street in Chicago. He's trying to beat an 18% house edge, and he becomes a speed handicapper. He's not looking at breeding. He's looking at the time the horses achieve. He's running experiments. He's keeping data. He's 11 years old and he's already thinking like a scientist. But here's what he learns. You can't beat a negative expectancy game. No matter how smart you are, no matter how many books you read, if the game has an 18% take against you, the math doesn't work. The house always wins. But then he says something critical. I graduated from an operation that had an 18% handle against it to something that's very dramatic positive expectancy in stocks. The Dow Jones average was 100 when I bought my first stock. Now it's at 42,000 and it's paid dividends the whole time. You can't find a horse that does that. This is the laboratory mindset. He's not reading books for theory. He's testing theories with real stakes. Even at 11, when he loses $50 at the Charleston racetrack, which was equivalent to delivering 5,000 newspapers, he sits in a Howard Johnson with a couple dollars left, buys himself a fancy meal, and just thinks about it. And at the end of the horse racing, he says, that was the dumbest thing you can imagine. I just kept betting every race. And when I went home, I was $50 poor, which was all I've taken with me, and I had to deliver 5,000 papers for doing something very stupid. This is learning through pain. This is what Nassim Taleb calls skin in the game. You don't really learn something until you lose your own money. And Buffett learned it at 11, that you need to find games with positive expectancy that stay there forever. And the takeaway is don't theorize, test, lose your own game, learn what doesn't work, then find a game with positive expectancy and never leave. This is the foundation of everything else Buffett did. Principle number 2, the ovarian lottery. Luck is everything, so give back. Now, before we go further, Buffett says something that I think is the foundation of his entire worldview. He calls it the ovarian lottery. He says, the easiest way to become rich is to pick the right womb to come from. If you're born rich, your father established a trust fund for you already. You're creating a dynasty. You don't have to do one thing in this life. And you can live better than all kinds of people who work their tail off. And I don't like that. This is humility disguised as economic theory. Buffett is saying an awful lot is luck. He won the ovarian lottery by being born in the United States in 1930 to parents who supported him. If he'd been born in Bangladesh or North Korea or even just a different neighborhood in Amha, the story changes completely. And then he says, I'd rather be born into almost the poorest family today in the United States than to be born any place else. Now, you might think this is just a feel-good rhetoric, but listen to what he does with this belief. He's giving away 99% of his wealth. He's made his kids promise to give away the rest within 10 years of his death. He's not building a dynasty. He's dismantling the dynasty. And he says, if I could lay out whatever I've got and pick out 3 countries that would permanently get out of the nuclear game, I'd do it in 5 seconds. I wouldn't wait around. That would be really something. This is not false modesty. This is recognizing that the system gave him leverage, and now he's returning it. This is the same thing that Carnegie did, same thing that Rockefeller eventually did. They all understood. You didn't do this alone. The country did it for you. And here's the kicker. Recognizing the ovarian lottery makes you better at business, because when you understand that luck is a huge component of success, you stop taking yourself too seriously. You stop thinking you're a genius. You start looking for structural advantages instead of trying to be the smartest guy in the room. Buffett says, if you choose the right partners, you're rich when you come out. You have won the ovarian lottery. And if you're born rich, you can live better than all kinds of people who work their tail off. And I don't like that, myself, but that is a reality. So here's the takeaway for you. If you win big, recognize the luck. Then redistribute, because the ovarian lottery is random and you could have just as easily been born into the opposite situation. This isn't charity. This is understanding the system you benefited from. Principle number 3. This is my favorite one. It's called trade up in friends constantly. Here's where Buffett really gets interesting. He says, you should be selective about your friends and hope they aren't too selective about theirs. You should be trading up at all the time. Now that sounds ruthless. It sounds Machiavellian. But listen to how he describes it. I was attracted to people who were interested in the same thing I was. Maybe not as intense as I was, but they had a different backgrounds. I wouldn't have traded any of my friends for anybody else. We ended up liking to do things together. This is a curation strategy. Buffett didn't just collect friends. He collected mentors disguised as friends. He lists them, okay? Here's a list. Ben Graham, Charlie Munger, Tom Murphy, Sandy Goldsmith, Kay Graham, and all of them were regarded in their own industries as unapproachable. But Buffett formed the Graham Group, a circle that met every year and a half for almost 50 years. And listen to how this started. Buffett says, Ben Graham was back in the country and I called 11 people and said, do you want to go to San Diego? It wasn't as easy to get to San Diego then as it now. And none of us had that much money. But then I said, Ben Graham is in town and he probably won't be in his hemisphere in our future. It's a rare opportunity to see him. So they all flew to San Diego. They spent a few days with Ben Graham and they had such a good time that they decided to do it again and again, and it became something. Buffett said, we had a good time for 50 years. People entered into it in a really unusual spirit of no ballooning. There was nobody that was more important than somebody else in the group. Now, here's what's fascinating. Over time, the topics changed. Buffett would assign different topics for each meeting. Initially, they were more financially oriented, but as the years went on, the topics became broader. Philosophy, ethics, human behavior. And Buffett says, you could actually watch the development of the group into the new activities as I added people over the years. This is intentional proximity. Buffett positioned himself near the best operators and the best thinkers, the best human beings he could find. And then he just absorbed them like a sponge. He says about Tom Murphy, if you don't have to study anything but study Tom Murphy, you wouldn't have had to study anybody else. And here's the key. These people weren't just smart, they were kind, Buffett says. Find me anybody that dealt with Tom Murphy, worked for him, girlfriends he broke up with 70 years ago, anybody that has a bad word to say about him. And that's the bar. That's trading up. You're not looking for the smartest people. You're looking for the smartest kind people. Because they're the ones who compound relationships over decades. And Buffett says, Charlie and I had more fun on things that failed than succeeded. It was humorous that a couple of guys like ourselves should make a big mistake. There's a connection. This is the friendship algorithm. Okay? Find people who are 1, smarter than you in some domain. Number 2, kind and trustworthy. Number 3, fun to be around and even when things go wrong. And the last one, number 4, interested in learning, not just winning. Then spend as much time with them as possible because you become the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And if those 5 people are Tom Murphy, Charlie Munger, Ben Graham, Sandy Goatsman, and Kay Graham, you're going to do pretty well. Here's a takeaway for you. Your peer group determines your trajectory. Trade up, find people who are better than you. Then spend time with them. Learn by osmosis. This is the highest ROI activity you can do. And don't feel guilty about being selective. The best people are selective too. And that's why they're the best. All right, before we go to the principle number 4, make sure you like, subscribe if you haven't already. So now, principle number 4, sell yourself the best hour of the day. This is my second favorite. Now, let me tell you about Charlie Munger's algorithm because Buffett talks about it like it's a religious text. Warren said, Charlie used to sell himself the best hour of the day. He was charging $20 an hour for his legal advice. And he just decided that his best hour was from 6 to 7 in the morning. So he was just going to sell himself that hour. Think about what that means. Charlie was a lawyer. He could bill clients all day, but he decided the first hour belongs to me. The hour wasn't for clients. It was for reading, thinking, compounding his own knowledge. And Buffett says, that's not crazy. Your future is your future, and you can't expect anybody else to do it. This is the same thing that Naval Ravikant talks about with the specific knowledge. This is the same thing that Rockefeller did by waking up early to read the newspaper before anyone else. This is Einstein working at the patent office and doing physics on the side. Buffett learned this from Charlie, and now Buffett does the same thing. He spends most of his day reading, he says. I might have read every book in the public library when I was young. I was looking for something, the idea of a library. Just think, a few hundred years ago, there wasn't anything to read at night. When you think of what life was like compared to what it is now, it's just wonderful. And then he says something critical. Long-term learning is more interesting. Nothing is more interesting than learning. This is time sovereignty. The best hour of your day should be yours, not your boss, not your clients, yours, because that's the hour that compounds. And here's the thing. Charlie wasn't rich when he started doing this. He was working as a lawyer. He had bills to pay. He still carved out the hours because he understood the investment in yourself has the highest return. And Warren said, beyond a certain point, you get in a hole. It is difficult to dig out. It isn't impossible. I give credit to people who do it, but do it the easy way. The easy way is to invest in yourself first. before you invest in stocks, before you invest in real estate, before you invest in anything else. Invest in your own brain. So, what is the takeaway for you? Well, sell yourself the best hour of the day. Invest in your own brain before you invest in anything else. This is the highest return asset you'll ever own. I guarantee you that. And if you're not doing this, you're slowly becoming obsolete. Principle number 5, overcome fear by forcing exposure. So here's a story nobody talks about. Buffett was terrified of public speaking. He says, when I was 21, I signed up for the Dale Carnegie course. I wrote them a check and I stopped payment on it. I was terrified of public speaking. I couldn't breathe. Everything was fine, but I just couldn't breathe. This is Warren Buffett, the guy who now speaks to 40,000 people at Berkshire annual meeting, admitting he had crippling stage fright. And he says, I don't know what caused that. I obviously had something to do that happened. I must have gone embarrassed talking in front of people because I could still talk to people individually and couldn't stop talking to them practically. So he had this weird split. He could talk one-on-one all day long, but for him in the front of a group, he'd freeze up. He couldn't breathe. So what did he do? He forced himself into exposure therapy. He went to University of Omaha and said, I'd like to teach here. They said, you don't have a PhD. He said, I barely have a master's, but I'd like to teach. And luckily for him, 3 of the deans liked him. One of them, Dean Thompson, he was going to marry his daughter later. Another one, Dean Helmstetter, his daughter was the first girl Buffett ever kissed. And Dean Lucas liked him too. So he got a unanimous vote. And then he taught for 67 years straight. He taught college students. He taught groups of women at Creighton University. He taught at a Scarsdale adult school. He just kept doing it because he knew if I stop, I'll revert back. And then he says, I knew that if I didn't start talking in front of people, I knew I would revert back to where I was. I didn't want that to happen. So I went out to the University of Omaha and just said, I'd like to teach here. This is the same thing Hemingway did with writing. The same thing Michael Jordan did with basketball. You don't overcome fear by thinking about it. You overcome it by doing the thing you're afraid of until it's boring. And here's the crazy part. Buffett says he loved teaching. He says, I loved it. It appealed to his style. I like my own ideas. I just had fun teaching. And I still do, except I ran out of gas a few years ago. He turned his biggest weakness into one of his strengths. And now there's a financial crisis in 2008, COVID, whatever. All right, these are the crises that he mentions. Who do they call? Warren Buffett, because he can explain complex financial concepts in plain English, because he's been teaching for 67 years. Here's the takeaway. Fear is a muscle, okay? You have to understand that. You can think your way out of it. You have to expose yourself to it repeatedly until your nervous system recalibrates. Then keep doing it so you don't backslide. Don't go back into default. And if you can turn your fear into a skill, that is even better. Now, we're moving to principle number 6. And this is circling back to the topic that I mentioned in the beginning, which is you can always tell somebody to go to hell tomorrow. So let me come back to Tom Murphy, because this is the most important management lesson in the entire video / the transcript. Buffett meets Murphy when he's 40. First lunch, Murphy tells him, you can always tell somebody to go to hell tomorrow. Warren says, I certainly did it more before I heard that advice than afterwards. And then he says, I watched him. He taught me more about human behavior than anyone. Every lesson I learned from him was a good lesson. Now, here's why this matters. Murphy was probably the best business manager Buffett ever saw, but he didn't do it by whipping people to death for 8 hours or turning it into 12-hour days. He brought out the best in everybody. He wasn't a Pollyanna, but he made every deal work. And the key, he never extracted the last penny. Buffett said Murphy never made a deal where he tried to extract the last penny. He always made good deals. And there's a number that he didn't make that he wished he made, but he did all kinds of things for other people, especially me. This is the relationship capital algorithm. It's the same thing Rockefeller did. Rockefeller would say, a friendship founded on business is better than a business founded on friendship. Murphy lived this. Buffett learned it from him. And here's the kicker. Buffett says, I don't know anybody that had more good interactions, whether it was buying businesses, operating businesses, or dealing with any person's problem. Girlfriends he broke up with 70 years ago, I mean, like anybody, has nothing but good words to say about him. Think about that. Girlfriends he broke up with 70 years ago still speak highly of him. That's not luck. That's intentional behavior. That's someone who understood that every interaction either builds or destroys relationship capital. And Buffett says it's very human to want to tell somebody to go to hell. Everybody feels that way. But when have you ever gained from it? He says, the only thing is you may have felt a little bit better for the moment. It can be really satisfying, but do it with a mirror or something. You can have a lot of satisfaction the next day if you just keep saying to yourself, you haven't given up the option. This is strategic patience. This is understanding that your reputation compounds over decades let me clarify. And one moment of anger can destroy years of work. And here's something I want to emphasize. Murphy was not soft, Buffett says. He wasn't a Pollyanna. He made all kinds of big decisions. He made those decisions with empathy. He made them with kindness. And because of that, people wanted to work with him again and again. So what does that mean for you? Well, your reputation is compounding. Every interaction is either an investment or a withdrawal. Don't extract the last penny. Leave money on the table. And if you're angry, wait. You can always tell somebody to go to hell tomorrow, but you can't unburn a bridge. Which then leads us to principle number 7. Learn from everyone, even the failures. Here's something fascinating. Buffett and Charlie Munger had more fun analyzing their failures than their successes. Warren says, Charlie and I had more fun on things that failed than succeeded. It was humorous that a couple of guys like ourselves should make a big mistake. And he tells the story about buying a department store in Baltimore in 1966 with Sandy Grossman and Charlie Munger. He says, after we bought the company, we knew we'd made a terrible mistake. It was just, it couldn't have been more dumb. There's nothing like owning something to see what's wrong with it. You spent your money, then you start to see what's wrong with it. It's like buying a house and finding out there's a whole bunch of things you don't like about it, except it's not so easy to get out of. And then he says, we made a mistake. And all three agreed on that. Here's the most important part that Warren talks about. Nobody blamed the other one ever. And actually, he said, they had a lot of fun discussing their mistakes. And he doesn't mean that they just sat around and laughing about it or anything. but just the very action, it was like being in a war or something. It pulls them together. When you have a common problem, you got wonderful people in the foxhole with you, and this brings people closer together. Now, this is the psychological safety algorithm. When you make a mistake with someone and they don't blame you and you don't blame them, you just figure out how to fix it together. That creates a bond that's stronger than any success. And Buffett says, I've never had a boss, and I've had the best of them. And I just wish I've met some of them a lot earlier. But one way or another, fortunately, most of them live a long time. So even though I met them at the age 40 something, I still had a long experiences with people like Charlie Munger and Tom Murphy. This is learning through apprenticeship. This is the same thing that Ben Franklin did, the same thing that Leonardo da Vinci did. You find someone who's mastered something and you just watch them. You absorb how they think, how they make decisions, how they treat people. And sometimes the best lessons come from watching how they handle failure. Now, don't just study success, study failures. And when you fail with someone and they don't blame you, you figure out together, that's when you know you found a real partner. And that's when the relationship becomes unbreakable. Principle number 8, something that Charlie Munger talks about a lot, and it is incentives are everything. So design them carefully. So Warren goes on this rant about corporate boards, and it's one of the most savage things in the entire video and transcript. And he says the independent directors are not independent. The money is useful to them. If I'm making $300,000 a year for showing up to meetings, meeting nice people, and all I have to do is not burp, what's going to be in the back of my mind? I know how to get a raise to $600,000 a year, and I've got to do is when somebody calls looking for a good director, and I say, well, I know this guy in Omaha, he'd be a good director. And now you've got 2 people out here who will recommend you because you didn't cause them any trouble. He says, it's the best job in the world to get $250,000 to $500,000 a year for doing something that's quite pleasant. They give you transportation. They have cars waiting to take you around. Everybody's polite. Everybody loves that job. Who wouldn't? This is incentive design, Charlie Munger's obsession. Warren learned it by watching what happened at other companies. And when he gives his brutal example of Wells Fargo, he says, at Wells Fargo many years ago, somebody thought it was important to emphasize how many different services people signed up for. Once a CEO has done that for months, they really can't reverse themselves and say this is really wasn't important, or we find out that it backfired. That doesn't happen in this world. And they had hand the company off to the next CEO, and the next CEO gets on the first call and they can't say, well, gee, John Smith, that ran this place was doing it all wrong. You don't say that. So you continue the process. And he says, when you do it on calls that go out to people who write stories about your company every time, you don't want to steer people toward the wrong behavior. It's like with your kids. They're going to watch how you behave, not what you say. This is how you get to Wells Fargo fake account scandal. This is how you get every corporate dysfunction, bad incentive, cascade down the organization like a virus. And then Buffett talks about how proxy statements have this requirement where companies have to disclose how much the CEO earns compared to the average employee. And it's like 200 to 1. And the SEC thought this would embarrass CEOs and they'd lower their salaries. But Buffett says, of course, what does is if I've been on 20 corporate boards. The CEO of ABC looks at this thing and he looks at the XYZ company and he thinks, I'm smarter than these guys and I'm working harder. Whatever they get, I ought to get plus some more. And then you get this ratcheting effect. He says, you couldn't think of a way to incentivize people more to kick up their own salaries than have them read what somebody next door is making. It's just exactly the opposite of what's intended. So, what does Berkshire do differently? Well, Warren said, we thought through all our policies, we say. What does it incentivize? The incentive of Berkshire is to have a bunch of people thinking about all other shareholders who do not really have anything to gain. He doesn't want directors making $300,000 a year. He wants them to have skin in the game, real ownership they bought with their own money on the same basis as other shareholders. He wants the job to be interesting but not remunerative. So Berkshire proxy statement is 20 pages. Everyone else is 100 pages. Why? Because they're not trying to justify ridiculous compensation packages. So if you want to know why a company does stupid things, look at the incentives. Then design yours to align long-term behavior. Make the job interesting. Don't make it lucrative. Make it about ownership because people will always optimize for what you measure. Principle number 9, avoid hypocrisy. Now, there's something Buffett says that hit me hard. And he's talking about his 3 kids, and he says they didn't have to watch hypocrisy. He means they grew up in a house where Warren and Susie's action matched their words. There's no lectures about money while living in a mansion. There's no speeches about hard work while they were lazy. The kids watched their parents live the values they claim to have. Buffett says, your kids are going to watch how you behave, not what you say. At first, they may give you a little leeway while they're learning the ropes, but after a while, they know what you're doing. This is the same thing that Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. And Buffett's kids absorb this, Susie says. My mom was so active in volunteer work, Planned Parenthood, the North Omaha community, and she didn't just write the check, she lived it. Peter says, if I weren't for my mom, I'd be in jail. If it weren't for my mom, my dad would be in jail. And Howie says, we grew up expecting nothing. To be honest, we were told that we had to figure our own stuff out. We were allowed to fail and make mistakes, and then we understood the consequences. This is the power of consistency. You can't fake this. Your kids, your employees will eventually see through the bullshit. So just don't bullshit them. And here's what's interesting. Warren and Susie didn't lecture their kids about money. They just lived modestly. Warren drove a Volkswagen, then he upgraded to a Cadillac only because he had to pick a business associates up at the airport. Susie drove Uncle Freddie's old beat-up station wagon, and Susie, which is the daughter, says, I was so embarrassed because it was like it's gonna break down anytime. But I think she did it to prove a point to me. Like, it just doesn't matter what you show up in. The kids went to public school, they rode the bus, they had to earn their allowance by cleaning gutters and raking leaves. And then Warren bought a slot machine and won most of the allowance back. They didn't grow up rich. They grew up normal. And now they're some of the most grounded people you'll ever meet. Even though they're about to give away $150 billion. What's the main lesson here? Well, live the values you preach. If you lecture your kids about money while spending recklessly, they'll learn hypocrisy. If you tell your employees to work hard while you coast, they'll learn cynicism. Behavior is the only curriculum that matters. Principle number 10, empower people and let them make mistakes. Susie Buffett says something about her foundation works that pure Buffett doctrine. One thing you have to do is to develop leaderships within your own organization, is to give people enough space and enough responsibility to make mistakes. And then how you react to that is super important. She's talking about her staff. She says, my staff has said to me many times, it's so refreshing to be in a place where we can screw up, we can make mistakes. This is the same thing Tom Murphy did at the Cap Cities. The same thing Buffett does at Berkshire. You hire great people, you give them authority, and then you let them fail. And Susie said, if you're charged with taking a risk, you're bound to make mistakes. You have to give people enough space to make mistakes and then view them as learning opportunities rather than grounds for firing. Now, contrast this with most companies. Most companies say they want innovation. They say they want people to take risks. But the first time someone makes a mistake, they get punished. They get demoted. They get put on a performance improvement plan. And what happens? Everyone learns to play it safe. Everyone learns to cover their ass. And everyone learns to do the minimum required to not get fired. And the company stagnates. But at Berkshire, at Buffett's Kids Foundation, they create an environment where it's safe to fail. And people who learn from their failures, those who are the ones who become leaders. Now, Howie Buffett says, we call them successful failures. Things don't work out the way you think. Sometimes that's a good thing. You learn enough, you learn from it, and sometimes you just learn that it didn't work and you couldn't have done anything else. But sometimes you learn it didn't work and here's why, so you change it. And this is how you build competent organizations. You don't micromanage. You don't punish every mistake. You let people learn. And the ones who learn fast become your next generational leaders. And Peter Buffett says, you had to get super clear with people, but it's okay. You want to hear everything. And also the performance aspect of all of it, it can just be something to navigate and figure out where all the distortion is. Because people are telling you things they think you want to hear, or you'll say something and they'll just be listening for that word that they need to use to get the thing. This is a psychological safety algorithm. If your team is afraid to tell you the bad news, you're not going to hear about the problems until it's too late. But if you create an environment where it's safe to fail, where it's safe to bring you bad news, where it's safe to say, I don't know, that's where you get real innovation. All right. Principle number 11. This is the boring one. Boring discipline. But it's very important. Spend less than you earn. Here's where Buffett sounds like your dad, but listen to it with intensity. Okay. You can spend 110% of what you earn once. Then you used it up. The rest of your life, you're underwater. Why in the hell do you want to be underwater? Why do you want to borrow money on credit cards? We own credit card companies. People love spending beyond their income. Just forget it. He's not being poetic. He's not talking about delayed gratification. He's talking about physics. If you spend more than you make, the math doesn't work, period. And then he says, this is so Buffett. Nothing wrong with a mortgage on a house at some point. But even that, be careful. The people who aren't worried about money are quite a bit happier than people who are worried about money. There's nothing magic. You just have to think a little and use a little discipline. This is the foundation of everything else. If you're drowning in debt, you can't take risk. If you can't invest in yourself, you can't wait for the right opportunity. You're forced to take whatever job pays the bills right now. But if you live below your means, you have options. You have time. You can wait for the right deal. You can say no to bad opportunities. And Buffett says, when I had $112 to buy 3 shares of City Service Preferred, doubling my net worth was not a remote possibility. I just had to go out and sell more bottles of Coca-Cola door to door. So there's no there's just no question. We can't do what we did before as Berkshire gets bigger. That doesn't mean we can't do anything, but we just can't do it. This is understanding the math of compounding. When your base is small, it's easier to double. When your base is 300 billion, it's harder. But the principle is the same. Spend less than you earn and invest the difference. And here's something powerful Warren says. I used to tell students, when I could make $150 a month delivering papers in the morning, well, what would it take? An extra hour and a half? Just get up an hour and a half earlier, have $150. He's saying your time is valuable, but when you're young, your time is the most valuable asset you have because you can trade it for money and then invest that money and let it compound for decades. The easiest way to get rich is not to be poor. Don't go into debt. Don't spend 110% of your income. Sell yourself the best hour of the day. This is table stakes. If you can't control your spending, nothing else matters. Principle number 12, which is called be forgiving of yourself, but change going forward. Here's something that Warren says near the end, and I think is the key to longevity. You should be very forgiving of yourself, but not totally forgiving of yourself. There's no sense looking back and saying, if I had done this, if I had done that, everything is history. You can't change it. You could change your behavior going forward, but your second half of your life should be better than your first half. The problem is you don't know what it's a half of. This is self-compassion without self-delusion. He's saying, yeah, you messed up. So what? You can't unring that bell. You cannot unfuck tomorrow. And then he says, my dad was always very forgiving of my misbehavior. He just say, I know you can do better. And that was very powerful stuff because I could do better. I mean it. I knew it. He knew it. And I was behaving like a jerk for a very long time. This is the growth mindset without the corporate jargon. Don't dwell on the past. Don't beat yourself up. But also don't excuse yourself. Just do better next time. And Buffett says, it's a difficult thing because you should be very forgiving of yourself, but not totally forgiving of yourself. One thing you should, it's a difficult thing because you should be very forgiving of yourself, but not totally forgiving of yourself. He's repeating himself because this is important. There's a balance. You can't hate yourself for the past mistakes, but you can't let yourself off the hook completely. You have to acknowledge the mistake, learn from it, and then move on. He says about his kids, they all show the same kind of things that kids show. My dad was always very forgiving of my misbehavior. He'd just say, I know you can do better. And it's pretty powerful stuff, I mean, because I could do better. He knew it. And it's nice to have somebody to have faith in you. This is parenting. This is leadership. This is how you help people become better versions of themselves. You don't shame them. You don't punish them. You just remind them, I know you can do better. Forgive yourself for past mistakes. And that's the main lesson here. Don't repeat them. The second half of your life should be wiser than the first. And you're still making the same mistakes at 60 that you made at 30. You haven't learned anything. Principle 13. All right. If you live long enough, you get the reputation you deserve. Here's the line that ties everything together. Johnny Agnelli told me one time, okay, this is quoting Warren Buffett. I only met him once. He said, when you get old, you got the reputation you deserve. He says you can get away with the other for a long time, but eventually you got it. And then Buffett says, if you look at Tom Murphy, Sandy, Charlie Munger, they all have the reputation they deserve in the end. This is the long game. This is why you don't burn bridges. This is why you don't extract the last penny. This is why you're kind. Because if you live long enough, the truth comes out. You can definitely fake it for 5 years, maybe 10, but not 50, not 60. Eventually, people figure out who you really are. And if you're a liar, a cheat, a jerk, that's your reputation. You can't buy your way out of it. Buffett is 94 years old. And every single person who's ever dealt with him has the same story. He's kind, he's honest, he's fair. That's not luck. That's 60 years of compounding good behavior. And then he says, it's true. If you look at those people I named, Tom, Sandy, Charlie, they have the reputation they deserve in the end. But of course, somebody dies at 40 or 30, it's a different situation. But if you live a long time, you've got it. This is the reputation moat. It's the only moat that can't be disrupted. It's the only moat that compounds indefinitely. And Warren said, the one quality that I measure people by enormously, because everybody can do it, is whether people are kind. That is something that really doesn't cost you anything. It is an act that doesn't belong to any religion, doesn't belong to anything. And why in the world wouldn't you be kind? Some people are and some people aren't, but you'll feel better if you're kind. Your reputation is the only asset you can't rebuild, so protect it. Be kind, be honest, leave money on the table, and if you live long enough, you'll get the reputation you deserve, and make sure it's a good one. Principle 14. Capital allocation is the CEO's first job. So now let's talk about what Buffett actually does all day. Because people think he's picking stocks. He's not. He's allocating capital. When he announces that Greg Abel is taking over the CEO, he says, Greg can do anything I can do, and he can do it way, way better. And then someone asked, but does he understand the insurance operation? Does he understand equity portfolio? Does he understand capital allocation? Do you know what Buffett's reply was? If you understand business, you understand the equity portfolio. We buy businesses like we buy marketable stocks. We buy marketable stocks like we buy businesses. They are businesses. This is the key insight. Buffett doesn't think of stocks as a piece of paper. He thinks of them as businesses. He doesn't think of businesses as separate from stocks. They're the same thing, he says. If you went out today and you live in Omaha all your life and you had to buy 3 companies with the money you couldn't sell them, okay, with the money and you couldn't sell them, you think about the same things that you think about when you buy stocks. You think about the companies have futures, which one got competitors that they are going to try and strangle them while they be successful. And then he says, it doesn't take a genius. It sure doesn't take any Greek symbols or anything like that to figure out what a business is worth. If Greg quit high school like some of our managers, he'd still be as smart as he is. I can't think of anything that's been written that teaches you more about how to buy a business than a couple of books I read 60 years ago. This is the anti-complexity stance. Wall Street wants you to think investing is complicated. They want you to think you need a PhD in mathematics. You need to understand black skulls and you need to use Greek symbols. Buffett says bullshit. You just need to understand what a business is worth, and that's not complicated. It's just hard. He says about Greg, he's operated more than I have when you get right down to it. He went over to England to run something. He came to Omaha to run a business for a few years. He knows there's no secret formula that the only CEOs have or anything of the sort. And Buffett says, I'd rather have Greg handling my money than any of the top investment advisors or any top CEOs of the United States. That's a huge endorsement. It's an endorsement based on understanding business, not understanding finance, not understanding economics, understanding business. The lesson here is that the capital allocation is the CEO's job. If you can run a business, you can value businesses. It's not complicated. It's just hard, okay? Just to simplify it. And the best operators understand this instinctively. Number 15. This is the final one. And thank you for spending the time with me here today. All right. If you enjoyed it, make sure you share on X and like. Number 15. Decentralization and trust. Here's how Berkshire actually works, Buffett says. Greg will be the decider. You can't imagine how much more he can get accomplished in a week than I can or a month. At the same time, he's not a distorted individual. He likes to play ice hockey with his kids. He lives what would look like a normal life. And then he says on January 1st, he's going to be the decider on a company that employs close to 400,000 people and has got plans to be around for 50 to 100 years from now. Now, how do you run a company with 400,000 employees? Most CEOs would say you need 17 layers of management. You need monthly reports. You need KPIs. You need dashboard reviews. Buffett says, nope. You just trust people. We have companies, all right? Warren says, we have companies will have companies that have 50 or 100 years from now. And it will not be viable in the economy of that world. But we'll have a whole lot more that develop over the years. And we can go wherever the country goes. We can go with capital. And Greg understands more business in a sense than I do. I understand pretty well the ones that came along while I was expanding Berkshire. But if you ask me whether I know much about the companies that are being formed today, the answer is no. This is admitting that you don't know. This is hiring people who are smarter than you in specific domains and trusting them to do their job. And when someone asks Buffett that he's going to do now that Greg is CEO, he says everything will be the same. I will come in. I won't be up there speaking at the annual meeting, but I'll be in the director section. Maybe you'll interview me half the time or something, but Greg will be the decider. This is the hardest thing for the founders to do, let go. But Buffett does it because he knows Greg is better at operating than he is, and he's comfortable with that. The main takeaway is decentralization scales. Micromanagement doesn't. Hire people who are better than you at specific things. Then trust them. Trust them. And if you can't trust them, you hired the wrong person. Now, here's the part that blew my mind. Buffett's three kids, Susie, Howie, Peter, are going to give away $150 billion. And Buffett told them. The reaction was, nope, I didn't want the job. Peter says, when I called him and said, I want to opt out, he said, I don't blame you. Howie says, we'd say that to all of us. He actually thinks it's kind of funny that we have to do this. And Buffett laughs at the idea that his kids have to give away all his money. He understands it's enormous burden, and he's not apologetic about it. He just says, you're the best people for the job. And here's why. They grew up watching him. Susie, behave a certain way. Not lecture, behave. Susie says, we didn't grow up rich. My dad wasn't rich and famous when we were kids. We went to public school. We lived in a regular neighborhood. We rode the bus. We had to earn our allowance in cleaning gutters and raking leaves. And Howie says, you know, pop culture has Succession or these various shows that show all this drama. And that's what people love to feed on. It's like, where's the problem going to be? And we've had no trappings of any of that growing up. So we're just not, it's not us. We're not that. This is the anti dynasty. Buffett could have set up a trust that would have kept his family rich for 10 generations. Instead, he's giving it all away within 10 years of his death. And he says, leave your kids enough so that they can do anything, but not enough so that they can do nothing. That's the line. That's the algorithm. Give them enough to have options, but not so much that they never have to work. And now his kids are running their own foundations. Small staffs, no bureaucracy, making 50 million decisions in 2-hour meetings. And they're doing it because they watched him do it for 60 years. And this is a long game. Buffett didn't just hand them the money and said, good luck. He gave them their own foundation 20 years ago. Let them make mistakes, let them learn, and now they're ready. You can't fake values. The kids will do what you do, not what you say. Buffett's kids are operationally excellent because they watch him operate for 60 years, not lectures, just behavior. So here's what I wrote down on my final takeaway. Okay. Warren Buffett built a $1 trillion company by doing one thing. He controlled the downside on everything. He didn't tell people to go to hell immediately. He waited. He didn't spend 110% of his income. He spent 90%. He didn't micromanage. He trusted operators. He didn't chase quarterly earnings. He thought in decades. He didn't burn relationships. He compounded them. He didn't extract the last penny. He left money on the table. He didn't fake values. He lived them. He didn't try to be the smartest guy in the room. He surrounded himself with people smarter than him. He didn't avoid failure. He learned from it. He didn't beat himself up for past mistakes. He just did better going forward. This is not sexy. This is not 10x your business in 90 days. This is the boring discipline of doing fewer stupid things than any other guy. And at 94, Warren says, I won a game I didn't deserve to win, but that's fine. I accept that. But here's the thing. He did deserve to win because for 60 years he played the long game. He optimized for reputation. He was kind. He left money on the table. He controlled costs. He stayed in Omaha. He drove a Cadillac only because he had to pick people up at the airport. And now his 3 kids who grew up in a Volkswagen and a beat-up station wagon are going to give away $150 billion to people who need it. That's a life well lived. And there's a line in the very end where Buffett says, the one quality that I measure people by enormously, because everybody can do it, is whether people are kind. That is something that really doesn't cost you anything. It is an act that doesn't belong to any religion, doesn't belong to anything. And why in the world wouldn't you be kind? Some people are and some people aren't. But you feel better if you're kind. And then he says, when you get your reputation you deserve, if you look at Tom, Sandy, and Charlie, they all have the reputation that they deserve. So, when you're 94 and somebody asks you how you did it, you'll say, I just tried to do a few stupid things than the other guy, and I was kind. That's the game.